While Israel demands the release of its remaining hostages held in Gaza, thousands more Palestinians remained locked up without charge in Israeli jails. Their campaigners say they are also effectively treated like hostages, held in abusive conditions and underreported while the focus remains on Gaza. I'm Hazem Sika, and today's newsmakers are Palestinian prisoners. An 82-year-old woman with Alzheimer's, medical workers and children as young as 12. They are among the nearly 10,000 Palestinians currently held in Israeli jails. Their numbers have doubled since the war in Gaza began, and more than a third are held without charge under what Israel calls administrative detention. And stories continue to emerge of the mistreatment and abuse of prisoners inside. Palestinian authorities say more than 60 have died in custody since the war began. Here's a look.
The release of some of the Israeli hostages broadcast worldwide. A moment of relief, and for Israel, a justification for its ongoing war in Gaza. Officials say the campaign will continue until all captives return. But there's another side to this story that is less talked about. Israel's vast network of prisons, where thousands of Palestinians, including children, women and the elderly, are held, many without charge, trial or even access to a lawyer.
So the people we interviewed for the report have actually been released recently. So clearly Israel does not accuse them of anything, yet they still experience the same kind of systemic abuse and torture that all Palestinian prisoners experience now throughout all of Israel's detention system.
Currently, nearly 10,000 Palestinians are imprisoned. More than 3,400 are in so-called administrative detention, kept in prison because of secret evidence which neither they nor their lawyers can see. Around 400 are children, some of them as young as 12, tried in military courts. Israel's own military database shows that in Gaza, only about 1 in 4 detainees is actually identified as a fighter. The rest include teachers, doctors, media workers and civilians, such as Fahamia al-Khalida, an 82-year-old woman with Alzheimer's. Former detainees are reluctant to talk, fearing reprisals, but those that do speak of harsh treatment.
The jail was very, very tough, as you can see in my situation. The proof is in my photos that show me before and after the jail, and that is enough to answer the question. It is an unfair detention, and there is killing, and they torture us with metal sticks. We were subject to all kinds of torture.
At facilities like Sde Taiman, Israeli soldiers have described seeing entire hangars of sick and elderly Palestinians called the geriatric pen. Others spoke of mothers separated from infants or detainees returned with visible signs of abuse. Since 1967, over 1 million Palestinians have been detained. So for every Israeli family desperately waiting for news of their loved ones, there are countless Palestinian families also waiting. Mothers, fathers, children, unsure if or when they will see their loved ones again.
Well, joining me now to debate that and more are our guests from occupied East Jerusalem, Israel and Palestine assistant researcher at Human Rights Watch, Melina Ansari. From Berlin, Governing Council member at Law for Palestine, Anisha Patel. And from London, we have Professorial Research Associate at SOAS, Chaim Breshith. Good to have you all with us. So, Chaim, if I could start with you. We made the comparison at the beginning of this between the Israeli hostages that are being held in Gaza right now and the Palestinian prisoners being held in Israeli jails, many of them without trial. Some have compared them to a hostage-type situation. Would you call them hostages?
First of all, I want to correct you. There are no Israeli hostages in Gaza at the moment. There are 48 soldiers of the occupation army. This is an army of illegal occupation. And actually, they were all taken from a zone that the UN in 1947 has called a demilitarized separation zone, a few kilometers around the Gaza Strip. The Israelis occupied this area illegally, built settlements, and built army camps. So actually, no one was actually taken as a hostage. These people were in a demilitarized zone that is occupied. So they are prisoners of war. Soldiers cannot be hostages. I hope you understand that. So all those 48 soldiers, some of them are dead, are prisoners of war. The Palestinians indeed are hostages. There are not 48 of them. There are above 12,000 of them. They are hostages because they were taken from hospitals, from food queues, from the home in the middle of the night, from schools, from universities, from everywhere. They have no rights, and they are isolated from their families, from the Red Cross, from lawyers that can give them legal support but are not allowed to. They are starved. They are not allowed proper clothing. They are not allowed showers, and they are tortured. And many have indeed died, while others are, hurt for life. So I think there is a very grave difference between the two groups. One group, the small one, the white settlers of Israel, are protected by Hamas, are fed by Hamas. They are getting as much food as their keepers. The people in Israel, around 15,000, some people say, but definitely more than 12,000, are suffering a treatment that is inhuman. That's the difference between the two groups, and these are the right terms to use.
Why, Chaim, then, hasn't there been more pushback from Israeli society, from the Israeli public, about this? Is it because they're simply not a lot of them are just largely uninformed about this, or many of them, they know about this and they support it?
Look, nobody is uninformed in Israel. You could say that during the Second World War, the population of Nazi Germany were not informed about the destruction of people in the Holocaust, not just Jews, but many others. In the Holocaust properly, almost 30 million people were killed. Only 6 million of them were Jews. And this was not reported in the German media or in any other media. We're not talking about this today. This genocide is reported by every single media. Israelis know about it. If they choose not to care about it, and they say so quite openly, that is because Zionism has turned them into monstrosities. Israel is now in a completely abnormal situation. Social, they are not really part of humanity. They are not really behaving as human beings. They are traumatized, for sure, because for the first time, the Palestinians have put up a resistance to their occupation on the 7th of October 2023, and managed to do things that no Arab army has done for decades. So I think, yeah, they are traumatized because they think they are so strong that something like this could not and should not be happening. But it did happen. And this trauma is justifying their inhumanity to the people of Gaza, to the people of Palestine, to the people of Yemen, Iran, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, you name it, they have done it. They are now fighting 6 countries at the same time. This has never happened in history, and 82+% of the Israeli population support this inhuman treatment of societies around them. That's why they are not doing anything, because they don't consider the Palestinian human being like themselves.
Melina Ansari, talk to us about the current situation right now with Palestinian prisoners that are being held in these Israeli jails, the numbers and how they break down and where things stand on all of this.
Thank you. Well, as you've previously mentioned, and my fellow panelists also mentioned, we're talking about more than 11,000 Palestinians held in Israeli detention, of which half of them are held without charge, without trial, based on no information whatsoever. So we're talking about administrative detention, where there are more than 3,500, and those under what Israel calls the unlawful combatants law, they are around more than 2,600. So taken together, these 2 types of administrative detention, they make up more than half of the Palestinians held in detention. And just to give you an idea, because numbers confuse people usually, before October 2023, the total number of Palestinians in Israeli detention was 5,200, which makes the total doubling since October 2023. And those under administrative detention, they did not exceed more than 1,300. And now we're talking about 3,000 plus. So that's triple the number of those held in detention. What we mean by administrative detention is basically the Israeli military detains any Palestinian person, a child, a human rights defender, a journalist, even political activists. They hold them inside detention without charge, without trial, and this type of detention can be renewed indefinitely based on secret information, which neither the detainee nor their lawyer can even see or know about, if there is secret information that exists in the first place. So this administrative detention is basically holding someone under the presumption that they might in the future at a certain point commit a crime. And let me be clear, under international law, administrative detention is not illegal. But the way the Israeli forces and Israeli authorities use administrative detention in a sweeping manner against the whole Palestinian population, with more than half a century into the occupation with no end sight, makes it far exceeding what the law authorizes for. But also we're talking about root causes when we talk about Palestinian prisoners and detainees. To be clear, Palestinians are prosecuted in a different and separate criminal legal system than, for example, illegal Israeli settlers residing in the West Bank. So there's a whole military court and military orders that Palestinians are prosecuted and criminalized under, that shows for years, and not only from Human Rights Watch, but many Israeli human rights organizations, that there's a sense of whitewashing. Israeli authorities use the complete opposite principles of fair trial guarantee, that is innocent until proven guilty. For them, Palestinians are all guilty without any need to prove any innocence. So the system in itself is built against Palestinians that go through it. And this is part of Israel's apartheid and persecution against Palestinians.
And I know, Melina, as a human rights worker, you must have heard many accounts of the conditions that these prisoners have had to endure. Talk to us a little bit about that, if you can.
Definitely, and these are harrowing testimonies we hear from released Palestinian detainees. But in a general, before I go into a specific case that was extremely harrowing to interview someone speaking about this, let me be clear what Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Israeli and Palestinian human rights organization, even the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner and the Commission of Inquiry into the occupied Palestinian territories, including Jerusalem and Israel, we are all reporting on prolonged cuffing of Palestinian detainees and blindfolding, prolonged cuffing to a point that there has been dozens of Palestinian detainees who had their limbs amputated from prolonged cuffing, according to physicians from Human Rights Israel. We're talking about also deprivation of proper food and water, sleep deprivation, being forced to kneel and always bow their heads down whenever the detainees go anywhere. But we're also talking about acts of sexual violence and gender-based violence, like forced nudity several times, repeatedly being subjected to complete strip searches, beatings while being naked, including on the genitals, the genital areas, even electrocution to the genitals, and being forced into torture positions. The case that I want to mention is of a 36-year-old father of three from Gaza who serves as a paramedic in the Palestinian Medical Relief Society, who was discharged in Gaza in order to go assist individuals who were attacked by Israeli forces and shot at. So as as a paramedic, as someone driving an ambulance, he went to that area in order to treat the patients and transfer them to a hospital. When he was met by Israeli soldiers, immediately forced to strip search, was beaten and immediately transferred outside of Gaza illegally, which is a war crime to detain Palestinians outside of their territory into the territory of the occupying power, which is Israel. And since the minute he was detained from Gaza and taken to detention in Israel, the paramedic Walid was telling us about torture all throughout. He mentioned that a soldier pushed the muzzle of an assault rifle into his head, and as another soldier dosed him with gasoline, threatening to set him on fire. And another soldier drove a military jeep towards him in a rush, threatening as if they will kill him through this military jeep. And it did not stop here. When he reached Naqab prison, after spending 20 days in Detention military facility, the man saw a detainee who was visibly weak and bleeding from his anus. When the paramedic asked the detainee what's wrong with him, the detainee testified to him and reported that he was gang raped by 3 Israeli soldiers holding an M16 assault rifle. And this is only one of the examples of what Palestinians are subjected to. Most of the videos we see of Palestinian detainees released from Israeli custody, the families of these detainees, they don't recognize their family members because they've lost at least 10 kilograms within a span of a few weeks or months in Israeli detention. So really, like, only when I only speak, for example, about the Gaza healthcare workers who were detained by Israeli forces and subjected to torture and abuse, let me remind you that there are 75 at least. We say at least because we don't really know what's happening inside detention until a person is released, because Israel is banning the Red Cross from doing its independent monitoring of detention facilities. But my point was that at least 75 Palestinians have been declared dead in Israeli detention, including Dr. Adnan al-Bursh, who's a surgeon and was the head of the orthopedic unit at Shifa Hospital. He was detained, and months later after his detention, he was declared dead in Israeli custody, as well as Dr. Iyad al-Rantisi, who's the director of the Women's Health Center at Kamal Adwan Hospital. hospital in Beit Lahia, who was also detained by Israeli forces from Gaza while doing his job of saving lives. And then he was declared dead in Israeli custody. So, as much as I can tell you what Human Rights Watch and others have reported, we know absolutely nothing about the reality inside detention, because Israel is isolating these detainees and it has the backing of ministers like Ben
Okay.
Gvir to do whatever they want.
Anisha Patel, in terms of the legal implications of this, I know Melina touched on this a little bit earlier about the administrative detention, in that legally speaking, it is legal, but it's the way that the Israeli authorities have used it. Just explain that to us a little bit more.
I mean, arbitrary detention is allowed to some degree with certain preconditions attached to it, like all international legal norms. And like my colleague pointed out, it's far beyond and outside of that framework that Israel operates in. In terms of international law, also hostage taking is illegal, is prohibited under the Geneva Conventions. The International Criminal Court statute also includes it as a war crime. In the last few months, when there was an oral hearing at the International Court of Justice around the duties that Israel has towards, or the obligations that Israel has towards, to the presence and activities of United Nations and other international organizations, the British lawyers put forward an argument that Israel is bound by Geneva Conventions to give the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross, access to the Palestinian prisoners, and they cannot kind of justify this refusal of access. So all in all, you can look at the different legal frameworks that are applicable and still come to the same conclusion that actually this is the practices of the Israeli authorities, both in the IPS system, the Israeli prison services, but also in the military camps, are outside of the law in all its shapes and forms. International law, definitely. And the problem, like Milena pointed out, with the Israeli law, for example, the law around unlawful combatants, the term itself is sort of arises from the Bush era of the global war on terror sort of a thing, which does not really put any legal conditions and frameworks on who can be arrested, for how long they can be held in, and so on. So I feel like this entire framework that has been created, which again applies only to the Palestinians because Israel is an apartheid state, and it does not apply to, for example, the settlers committing violence and kind of going on about killing and murdering. It only applies to the Palestinians. So even within the Israeli legal framing, these laws in and of themselves don't kind of stand up to the scrutiny of international law. Plus, there are cases in front of the Israeli Supreme Court that talk about practices that are being undertaken, that talk about access to the ICRC, which the court has not responded to. So for getting any sort of legal aid and attention to these prisoners within Israel is almost not possible, given the framework in which the Israeli state operates and the legislation that it applies to the Palestinians from across the territory. And in terms of international law, there is movement happening at the ICJ around this conversation, but there needs to be a lot more that needs to happen, for example, at the ICC, where there should be investigation, and possibly the war crime of taking hostages could be included in the arrest warrants that have been issued or the ones that will be issued. Plus, states have other tools. States have the tools of sanctions and other leverage that they have to ensure that these practices, which again fall completely outside the remit of international law, are not kind of enforced on the Palestinians.
You know, and when you hear a lot of this, you get the impression, Anisha, that there is kind of zero accountability in all of this. You can talk about how much this is a violation of international law, yet those responsible haven't been held to account. Do you get any sense at this point that the tide may be turning on this at all?
Absolutely. I mean, the tide is turning on this, and I think it's a bit hard to see that right now because the violations keep increasing. So we don't see the legal changes that have taken place in the last 2 years. But in any case, for any of these legal changes to actually be enforced and be applicable on ground, we need mass mobilization. We need political incentives in different states that actually push states to do what is legally their job to be done. the Sumut flotilla, for example, is actions of citizens that are instead of the actions that states are supposed to be taking. So I feel like for the prisoners and for the illegality of this question, but generally, broadly, all questions that we're kind of tackling legally around Palestine at the moment, we need a lot more to be moving on the ground in different states, for example, in the US, in Germany, in states that have material leverage and investment in Israel continuing to do what it's doing, for a shift to be enforced at the international level. So yes, there are changes, but there's not nearly enough movement to enforce these changes. The alternative mechanism is to kind of bring these international legal changes into national jurisdictions. And this is happening in different jurisdictions across the UK, the EU, and other states where all of these changes that international law has brought to us in the last 2 years, like the ICJ advisory opinion of July 2024, which calls for the end of the unlawful occupation of the Palestinian territory and asks states not to aid and assist in this exercise, have been brought into national jurisdictions in different countries where the supply of arms, where the supply and trade of settlement products, goods, basically anything that allows Israel to continue its unlawful presence and practices in the occupied Palestinian territory are being challenged. And I feel like it is this kind of action that is absolutely crucial in kind of changing the status quo.
We've got to leave it there. Thank you to all three of our guests, Haim Rashid, Milena Ansari and Anisha Patel. Thanks very much for being on with us. And thank you for watching. You can follow this on X and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Hazem Sika. We'll see you next time.